how do you know if you're doing well in your job,
Good
right?
question.
Like, how are you tracked? What are you worried about? What kind of benchmarks do you have?
Yeah, so it's kind of a jar. I don't know if it's an industry term, but so we are. It's hard, right? Because the sales cycle is it could be 2 months, it could be 18 months, and so for us, it's marketing qualified leads. So again, when a individual is scanned, it's not considered a lead. I know there's some people on that are listening that will argue that well, if someone is scanned, it's a lead. It's a conversation, and what we then have to qualify is are they interested in working with us? Is there a project that's coming up? So we take it from here's this conversation to here's the marketing qualified lead. And then working with sales, that becomes from a qualified lead to a sales opportunity. So for us, I'm measured on how many total marketing qualified leads and then sales accepted leads. And so there's kind of this path, if you will, what goes from marketing qualified leads, so MQL, we hand that off, we have that lead pass to sales, that's a sales accepted lead. So the sales is then reaching out to the individual that we made at the event, and then that might become an opportunity. But again, the sales cycle for us for services could be 12 to 18 months. And so that's kind of where we are working to show here's the opportunity that's potentially coming from this company.
Mhm.
But we're measuring my benchmark is what's the marketing qualified lead and then sales accepted and just being able to show here's the growth year over year. And back to the comment I made about the target on my back, we need to sell what we are doing and not just saying, hey, we are doing events and we're spending all this money for no really return on investment.
Yeah. Piece there, you saying 2 to 18 month in terms of a sales cycle, right? One of the pushbacks that I've gotten, not pushbacks, but just kind of like one of the rebuttals essentially is when people can't measure, can't track, or they're like, yeah, but it's always that the sales cycles are all over the place. And my constant reply to that is, okay, I understand that a sales cycle can be extremely long or extremely short. And that gap and the length of the long ones can essentially screw up that tracking, right? But if you never start and you don't gut out 18 months and then get to the 20th month, 24th month and beyond, it'll start to catch up. If you're doing it the right way,
Oh yeah.
if you are tracking, it will start to catch up. But people get lost in the fact that like they get 3 months in and it's like, oh, well, nothing's closed or this. It's like, no, it's like, okay, it's 2 to 18 months. So you're going to have to take your time and document and track.
Well, and it's so hard too. I mean, Lenovo is such a big company and there's so many processes. North America may differ from what APAC is doing that may differ from EMEA. And so for us, it's really working with what we call lead generation teams and
Mhm.
selling. Again, I'm a big proponent of selling up and selling what we do internally. And so for me, it's relationship building. I need to make sure that I'm building my relationship, my network with the lead team, so that as we do these events and we have the lead passes, what we call, they're not surprised and they know as soon as I get this lead from this event, we know how we were qualifying. And to take it a step further, what we did for our events is okay, we're getting these leads that come in. As soon as you get them, we need to action them because within 2 weeks, 3 weeks, they become colder and colder. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
what we piggybacked off of what another business unit was doing was 10-day to action. So effectively, as soon as we get it within Dynamics, you have 10 days to action. If after day 11 nothing has happened, we send an email to that respective manager. And it's not meant to make anyone look bad, but we're spending all this money, we're doing all this work to essentially hand over some gold to the sales team that they either are just too busy, they don't have the information. So when I do an event, I send an email to our team is saying, hey, this is the background on the event. So I put together a brief that's an event recap. So here's the highs, here's the lows, here's the content that we discussed. Pass that to the sales team. You have 10 days to action. Here's some background so that you know how to
Mm.
communicate with the individuals. And then you have 10 days to action. And we had an event in Amsterdam. Day 11 came and I worked with the local leaders to provide them with outstanding leads that hadn't been actioned.
I like that. I like that you have that process dialed in, right? Because this stuff does have to go from events, marketing, sales. Does it go to sales? Does it go to a campaign? Does it like where does it
Yep.
live
The
after?
nurture.
Yeah. And there's a whole discussion in marketing right now about marketing qualified leads, right?
Well, and
What
and even
really
it's
is a
okay to
lead?
have it's okay to have cold leads. I mean, you're
Mhm.
gonna have things where someone just goes and picks up a promotional item. Like, I would not qualify them as hot or warm, like cold. But what's good to do is we know that there's gonna maybe 20% of our leads will be cold. What's that nurture campaign that you're gonna have after
Yeah.
where you can push them into a Marketo campaign where you
Mhm.
hope that they receive an email that creates an action for them to click. And then once they click, how do you route that to sales? So it's
Yeah.
kind of just discovery as you go.
I did an episode with a buddy of mine I went to college with. He owns a marketing agency called The Giant Goat, and Doug's real sharp, but he was talking about this thing called the Fibonacci sequence. And he was talking about it's a whole sequence, an idea of like leading up to an event and then after the event.
Oh yeah.
And it's a specific sequence of emails and a cadence and a structure. And he's like, it's just statistically proven to work. And he said, seemingly what you did, the further away that you get from the event, the colder that lead gets and the less likely they are to respond or engage. So this sequence actually covers that for you. And not that you can set it and forget it, but you should follow it. It was interesting. I had to look into it and look it up and stuff like that, but it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. Again, the amount of work that you do pre should be the same amount of work that you do post. It's not
Mm,
just here's the event, we're doing all this pre-planning. Once the event happens, let's look at all the highs and lows and move on. It should be following up, setting weekly cadences after with the sales team. Here are the open to the even 3 months from now. Hey, these are the leads that are still open. Are we qualifying them? Are we disqualifying them?
I kind of started using the analogy. I feel like events at times are like a piece of fruit that you have to squeeze harder than any other fruit. But when you do, you just hit this point where it just like bursts open, right? And it's just, even Nancy, who was on the panel with you yesterday, when her and I spoke on a podcast, she was saying like doing events right takes effort. It really, really does. But those relationships, that interpersonal, those connections, those touch points, it does so many different things other than just drive a lead or
Yep.
add leads into the queue. There's so many more things going on at those events that it does. So it's you saying about the effort on the front goes into the effort on the back. I think a lot of people miss that and super important.
Well, and sometimes we're sales. I mean, it's funny how events wear so many hats, but also take the burden that, well, why aren't these leads being actioned? Why aren't these leads being
Mhm.
followed up? And we're not sales. I mean, that is really why it's so important that we have this relationship with sales from the get-go, that they're essentially a seat at the table and their skin is
Yeah.
in the game because we are only as successful as our weakest link. And that's not to say sales is weak, but we need to rely on them to really help move this
Yeah.
metaphoric boulder uphill.
I makes me think I have a friend of mine works for a medical device company. He's in sales and he's gone to trade shows for years there. And one day him and I were talking and we ended up in this argument. And he's like, trade shows don't work. Right. And I'm like, nah, I'm like, bullshit, And I
Yeah.
started talking to him and he's like, man, I've been going to trade shows for years, blah, this and that. And I said, okay. And I just asked him I said, let me ask you some simple questions. I said, what was the last show you were at? He tells me the show. It was a month and a half ago. I said to him, I said, what did you do pre-show? He's like, what do you mean? I said, exactly. You didn't do anything. I said, you didn't even know what the strategy was. So were you setting meetings? Right? What was your plan going there? And then I asked him, I said, did you speak to the event person, to a marketer, to anybody from your team about the strategy, the approach, the scheduling, the day, all the stuff that was to come? He's like, well, no. And then the more you just unravel it, you realize how disorganized it truly is. And a
Yep.
lot of companies just bring in salespeople just to have them there and they're supposed to sell, but they don't really know what's going on. And that work is not being done by events or marketing or anybody.
Well, that's why it's always good to. I mean, like, listen, what I'm saying here, we're learning as we go too. So like, we are not perfect by any means, but the sales within the booth, we've gotten into positions where sometimes we outsource people to really drive and start the conversation so that by the
Yeah.
time it's almost like qualifying. We're just
Yep.
having someone there that's third party that engages, qualifies, and then moves them to the right person because
Hmm.
the sales team, as good as they are, they sometimes just get to the booth and they're sitting around, and it's like we have to engage. And if we
Hmm.
have to think of these external things to really help you, we're going to do that because ultimately we want to make sure that we're all successful.
Yeah, it does take a little bit of moving and shaking on that floor. It takes the it takes being
Yep.
there. It really, really does.